is everybody today? How are you doing? Everybody's okay? Good. Thank you for joining us.
There we go.
Is this me, Nick, or you?
This is me.
Oh, good.
All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is the Advocacy and Program Action Team August Academy, or short version, the Advocacy 101 August Academy. And Vivian, do you want me to cover this slide?
We can just tag team it if you'd like. So this
Sure.
is the first time that we've done this August Academy. And what we want to do is to make sure that people understand the role of advocacy. We want to talk about APAT and help people get more oriented to the full organization of the US and Minnesota and the resources that are available to you. And then we want to encourage regular networking, and that's part of what APAT does. It allows you to join us. You can be a member. You don't have to be focused specifically on advocacy or action or even program, but it's a good way to learn about what's going on in the organization. And then we will be answering questions and providing any feedback for you. We had talked about this earlier. Please feel free to ask questions as we go along if something is confusing. And you can also write down questions, and we'll spend a fair amount of time at the end talking about who we are, what we do, and what is going on in advocacy. So there you go, Nick. Now it's time for the poll.
All right. See if I can figure out how to operate it. All right. Launch the poll. All right, so there should be a poll on your screen. We want to know how new or tenured you are. So if you have never been in a leadership position for advocacy, program, or action, that's an option. Maybe you are a program chair or an advocacy chair, but you still feel pretty new at it. Maybe you've been an advocacy chair for a long time. So let us know. How many people are here?
15, I think.
Yeah, okay. I think we have most people. I think we're just waiting on one or two more. And if you don't want to say you can't decide, that's okay. Give it another few seconds here. I actually don't know whether I get to see the results when I hit end poll, so.
Oh, okay. I can tell you what the results are. So we have 57% or 8 people are new. And then we have 5 who are relatively new, so 36%. And then we have 1 long-term leader, and that person is at 7%. So that tells us a lot.
Yeah.
Thank
you.
And
I think I shared the responses. I think everyone can see them. Is that right? Yes. Okay. I'm getting a thumbs up from Laureen.
Yep.
Thanks. All right.
Okay. So we might as well move on.
Yeah. All right. Introductions. So I am Nick Harper.
Oh, there, I'll get rid of it. The results were still on the screen.
Oh, yes. You may have to click out of the results box.
I did.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm Nick Harper. I'm the Civic Engagement Director. So I'm staff with the League of Women Voters of Minnesota. My position is split among both advocacy and voter service. So if you have ever been part of the voter service calls or have ever needed, advice or guidance or a sounding board on voter service, I'm usually the staff person you call or email. So I'm also a contact for media sometimes, and if local leagues are interested in legislative issues or election policy, anything like that, I'm here as a resource for that as well. So you'll see me in multiple other August Academies if you're going to other August Academies this week. I will also be in the People Powered Fair Maps one and in the voter service one. And I think there's actually 2 voter service ones. So I'll see you in both of those. So, and I will introduce Vivian. Vivian Latimer Tanniehill is our advocacy chair. And I will let Vivian tell a little bit more about herself.
Okay, so I am on the board of directors for Minnesota, and I am the advocacy chair there. And then I am part of the Woodbury Cottage Grove Area League, and I am the advocacy director there. And so in my role, I support the Minnesota Lobby Corps and Observer Corps, and I facilitate advocacy and program action team calls in partnership with staff. So I have a unique role, and I don't know how much you know about how these assignments are given out. When you get on the board, and I would encourage any of you to join the board or apply for the board, because that's where you really learn a great deal about the organization. But once you come in, you can elect to get an assignment, a committee. And because I had worked with Nick for so long, I used to go and harass him about things that I wanted to do for my league, and he would kindly reply and give me answers. So I thought it would be a good opportunity to work with him. So I chose advocacy. And one of the first things that I was assigned to do was to bring together and activate our action chairs. And so, Nick, if you'd like to go to the next slide. Nick and then Paul Huffman and I talked through this a lot when I first started. And this is my second go round on the board. So we talked a lot about where we wanted to be with this, what we wanted to do. And so my primary focus with APAT, Action and Program, with Advocacy and Program Action Team, APAT, is really to engage leadership among action chairs or advocacy chairs, and as well as program chairs. Because that way, if we're engaged and we're talking, then we can start exploring how we align within the organization. So we want to align our work at the local level with our state and US. And we also want to support the strategic alignment of what's going on throughout the organization. And as we go through this presentation, you'll get a better understanding of how we all work together. So Nick, if you could move on. And I did all these floating slides, so you have to bear with me. So when we looked at advocacy and program on the royal we here, I started to see some really good alignment. And when I say program, it's program with a small p, and those are the people that are actively working to put together programs. They go out and they contact people and they get their speakers in, they work with the board, and they also make sure that everything is in place. So that's what a program small p person does. And then you have the advocacy role. And this came out of the US booklet. And it really helped me to understand how this organization works. So I would recommend that as well. But advocacy is really broader than lobbying, and Nick will talk about lobbying later. And it really develops policy briefs just in the same way that program people are doing studies. And then we provide forums for discussing issues and educating people. So the key thing is around education. Because I know advocacy can be scary, but it's not. It's educating, and we're all educators. So you can go on, Nick. So the thing that Michelle really wanted us to cover was what does an advocacy or action chair do, and what does a program chair do? And I will start out with the caveat that every league is different, and your advocacy or action chairperson is going to morph to and fit the organization in the same way your program chair does. Sometimes the advocacy and program chair are the same people in organizations, and sometimes there's distinctly different. So in our league, I am the action director, but it really is the action chair. And then our program chair is Andrea Hobley. And so we do kind of distinctly different roles. So I coordinate the activities around advocacy within our league. So right now we have a local advocacy chair that does the local observer corps. And we also have a person who is working specifically on redistricting. And then there's a number of other things that I do, like the action alert team, and also just working with the league, the board, and I'm into everything. And Linda Wallings would tell you that there's very little that I am not involved in with my league. So you see, I support the Program for Action, which is the Minnesota side of it. And I also support the Lobby Corps and the Observer Corps. I take the training every year. And then I speak with one voice, or try to support that philosophy. And that's similar to the work that's going on with the program chair. Can you move forward? Otherwise, I'll just keep talking.
I'm sorry if I missed it earlier. What is WICCA? WCGA?
Oh, that is Woodbury Cottage Grove Area League. It's my league.
Thank you.
My local.
That makes
league.
sense. Thank
you. Okay. Sorry about that. I didn't say that, but I didn't say what WICCA was. So APAT is like the brainchild of the discussions that I talked about earlier. The tool that we're using to bring our action chairs and program chairs together. And it's the primary mechanism for local leagues to share best practices, information, and various activities. It is a fun group. They're engaged, and they're excited about what we do. So in this group, we provide consistent information on activities that are working and being held at the national level, the state level, and then we have an exchange of information from the local leagues. We want to ensure that whatever we're doing at the local leagues really conforms to our positions that are outlined in our program for action and our US impact on issues. And we want to also provide a safe space where people can ask questions and clarify, how does this organization work? Because I know that when I first started, I thought, my God, this is the most difficult organization to understand. But once I started getting involved with the state office and also doing more work, it started to become much more clearer. So this is a real good tool for those who are new to the organization, who've not worked in advocacy, to understand how the organization aligns, how things cascade down and they go back up again. And the league is really a neat organization, but it takes a while to get involved. And I think some of you will agree with me on that one. So we can go on to the next slide. So our meeting information. We meet on the third Friday of the month at 2 p.m. And all league members are welcome to join us for the calls. You can stay on as a regular member, or you can pop in when there's something interesting going on. If you'd like to be part of the group and receive the invitations, send me or Nick an email and we will add you to the distribution list, or rather make sure you're added to the distribution list. Again, we talk about a lot of different things. Sometimes we'll have guest speakers, and sometimes it's just us talking about what's going on in the league. We always have a consistent report from the staff. So we hear about what's going on in the legislature. And when we switch to, I'll let Nick cover that. But so we find out what's going on with the legislature. We find out what's going on with people-powered fair maps. We find out what's going on with the climate change task force. So there's lots of information that comes out of this. The one thing that I think this group does better than anybody else in this organization is they collaborate. And so we've seen this energy where people are sharing information. We've shared email addresses. So people are contacting one another, and they're collaborating, they're co-sponsoring events, they're getting involved. And that is what we want you to do. We want you to be energized about this organization and understand how we operate. So you can go to the next slide. I thought this would be fun. Now, I do not expect you to read this slide. This is a snapshot of last month's agenda. And the purpose of showing you this is to show you how much information is being shared. So if you look through here, you see the blue links, you see that we start with what's going on at the US level. Then we go on to talk about what's going on at the state level. We exchange, and this one we had a guest speaker who came in to talk about dying with dignity, and then best practices, and then meeting information about what's going on in the organization, where you should sign up for things on the calendar. It just a wealth of information. The one thing that I found is I'm one of those people that likes to research. And so I go through and I look at what's on the US site and what's on the Minnesota site, and I start pulling this information and sharing it. And that's how this all comes about. But this organization has a wealth of information that most people never see. So Nick, I think you can move to the next slide. And then I am going to turn it over to my partner in crime, Nick Harper. And he's going to take you through navigating the organization.
Thank you, Vivian. So I think when people first joined the league, including myself, so a little bit about me, I actually joined the league in 2014 as a league member, like any of you. And then I was later recruited to become a staff member after a few years. So when I first joined, I felt the same way in many ways, where it was hard to understand like what's happening at national versus what's happening at the state versus what do we do at the local level, and like how does that relate or not relate. And so what I try to do is some of these next slides are hopefully help to show what those paths are and where those connections are. For how that information or action flows. So I do like to remind people that we are a 3-level organization. Sometimes it's called a federated system, but we have a national league, the League of Women Voters of the United States. And they work and coordinate on issues nationwide. So an example of that is they are kind of a resource for the People-Powered Fair Maps campaign. We're participating at that in the state level, but that is a nationwide campaign. Many leagues across the nation are participating in that. And the National League provides some limited funding, lots of resources and coordination, branding, etc. The National League also participates in federal legislative activity, including lobbying. So they are working, for example, on the For the People Act in the legislature in Congress, as well as the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. So those are some of the ways that they do their advocacy at the national level. If local or state leagues want to do federal action, so we want to lobby our Congress people to do something, we do have to work with the National League, and there's a specific request form for that, and the link's here in that in this slide, and it asks questions like, you know, what exactly are you requesting? Who will you be making that request to? Is it a letter? Is it to pass a bill? Is it a resolution you're asking someone to sign on to? What league position supports this action? We'll talk a little bit more about league positions in a minute, etc. And I often encourage folks, if you want to take federal action, if your local league wants to take federal action on an issue, give me a call first or shoot me an email, because national tends to be very selective in what they move forward with. They don't approve everything, and there's strategic reasons for that, and we can talk more about that if you're really interested in that. But they do also ask, is this something that the state league is interested in? So lots of questions that go into that, so that they are making coordinated and really strong efforts. There also is the state league. The state league works on a statewide basis, doing statewide campaigns, the people-powered fair maps being the main one right now, as well as we work on legislative efforts for legislative advocacy. That does include lobbying. For example, you know, testifying in the state legislature on certain issues. For example, yesterday, the Senate Redistricting Committee had a hearing in Bemidji, Minnesota, and we submitted some written testimony to that committee. We also work with our local leagues and provide other resources. So, you know, I have come to local leagues to do presentations on what's happening at the legislature, what our upcoming legislative priorities are for the next legislative session, things like that. And we also provide local leagues legislative interview guides, which is a way that local leagues can get involved in state advocacy. And then, of course, there's our local leagues, and you're always welcome to collaborate with other local leagues, especially if you have similar interests. So, for example, a lot of local leagues have had interest in policing policy, and that can range from use of force, body cameras, transparency, hiring practices. I think there have been multiple leagues that have discussed those issues. And so there's always collaboration or connection between leagues that might be interested or working on the same issues. So those are the three levels to think about when you're thinking about the league. And it's important to remember that you are part of all three. Often when people join the league, they get super hyper focused on their local league that they joined, which is great and makes sense because, right, that's your local league. It's who you see on a regular basis. You live in that town or that area. But don't forget that there's a whole state and a whole national league that we work together too. Let's see if I can, there we go. So the first thing that I like to really emphasize is remember to keep your advocacy and voter service separate. The reason for that is the state league is a 501c3 nonprofit, and most other leagues, I would say actually I think every league at this point in Minnesota, or almost every league, are also a 501c3, or they are an LLC under the state organization. Long story short, that just means that there are special rules that apply to ensure that we can receive tax-deductible donations and are a tax-exempt organization. And those rules require us to be very careful about how we do our advocacy and how we do our voter service work. And it is I don't want to say an oversimplification, but the general rule is do not mix advocacy and voter service. And there's some guidance that I'll show you later about how to keep those separate and what are good do's and don'ts. But when you're thinking about your advocacy, I think that's one of the big rules to keep in mind, is to not mix the two. The reason for that is when you mix the two, that can become partisan activity. And that is first not good, because in general, our mission is to be nonpartisan. And secondly, it also might violate those tax rules, which would put us at legal risk. So that's why we have that general rule. So a lot of people, oh, hold on, I think there might be a question in the chat. Oh, yes, okay. So the state and local advocacy, I like to remind people that, often people get really focused, especially when they're first involved in politics, they get really focused in, the president and Congress. But there's many levels of advocacy that the state and local leagues can participate in. So at the state level, we do lobby the legislature, but we also lobby the governor on certain occasions. And we also monitor or lobby statewide boards, commissions, and councils. So for example, one that we have monitored in the past is the Campaign Finance Board, the Campaign Finance and Public Disclosure Board, because they work with money in politics, which is one of the issues that the league has worked on in the past. When we do lobbying for any of these state boards or commissions, that should work with the state league on that actual lobbying. There's a couple reasons for that. The first reason is when we do lobbying, we actually do have to record expenditures for lobbying and report that to the Campaign Finance and Public Disclosure Board as a matter of transparency under state law. Another reason is we like to ensure that we're all coordinated and saying the same thing. There have unfortunately been rare occasions where more than one local league have been lobbying legislators, but they weren't coordinating through the state office, and so they were asking for different things on the same issue, and we want to avoid that. We're speaking with one voice, if you remember that point from Vivian's earlier slide. And we can talk more a little bit about lobbying and how to get involved in that in one of the later slides. But I also like to remind folks that there's a lot of local advocacy that you can do as well. Lots of local officials who are elected, or if they're not elected, they still are, their job is to be responsive to constituents. So of course you've got your city councils or town boards, your mayors, county commissioners, county sheriff, county attorney, county officers. Those are all elected officials. So they're responsive to constituents. There's also school board, who are also elected. There's also sometimes neighborhood groups. So that can include, so for example, Minneapolis and St. Paul, they have neighborhoods and neighborhood boards. So they often work with those neighborhood boards. So if you have something like that in your city or in your area, that's something else to consider. And of course, there's often local boards, commissions, and councils as well. Advisory boards or advisory councils or tax boards, soil and water boards. I mean, it goes on forever. So there's lots of opportunities for local advocacy as well. So that's another piece I like to remind folks. People sometimes have kind of felt like there wasn't anything for local leagues to do. I like to say that's not true. There's plenty. And if you need ideas, that's one of the reasons to come to the APAT calls, because people have lots of, will have ideas for you, I'm sure. Each of the National League and the State League, we establish certain legislative priorities every year or 2 years. So the National League establishes legislative priorities, I think, every year. These 4 are the issues that they focused on the most this year, which is redistricting and reapportionment, election administration reform, money in politics, and voter protection. There are also other urgent issues that they still work on to some degree. So they will take select action on climate change, equal rights amendment, justice reform, national popular vote, and reproductive choice. So they will do some action. It's not their major focus, but they will, in certain times, especially when it's particularly urgent or critical, they will take action on those issues as well. At the same level, or in the same way, the State League establishes legislative priorities. We establish these priorities through the Board of Directors. The Board of Directors approves the legislative priorities, typically the November or December prior to a legislative session. So legislative session in Minnesota is typically January or February through mid to late May. So legislative priorities are reviewed and updated the winter before the legislature starts. Our major priorities this past year is redistricting reform, which includes the People-Powered Fair Maps program, restore the vote, legislative transparency, and voter empowerment. We also do work on climate change. So one of the main ways we work on climate change is we have a climate change task force where members can participate in that task force to work on that issue. We also partner with other organizations. So our main partner on environmental issues is the Minnesota Environmental Partnership. And we work with them to sign on to certain actions, whether that be letters to the legislature or other activities. So we also do work on climate change to some degree. And all of these priorities are based off of our program for action, which is that picture you see on the next slide. And I think, nope, I'll go back. The program for action, which is that picture of that booklet, that's available on our website. That is the document that contains all of the official positions approved by the league's members for action. So when we take an issue, we typically work through a study and consensus process, which I'll get to in a little bit. At the end of that process, an official position is developed and adopted, and that becomes the basis for what action we take and when we can take it. So we would only take action on an air quality issue, for example, if it matched up with this position. The National League has positions that they adopt at the national level at national convention. We also have state positions that are adopted at the state level at state convention. We'll talk more about what that process looks like here in a little bit. I like to remind folks that we have lots of resources for members if they're interested in action and advocacy activities. Lots of guidance, best practices, action kits, things like that that are available on the member resources page. We can explore that page a little more in depth later if people want. Let me know, but we can do that later. Otherwise, you can find this under the local leagues tab on our website. There's a link to member resources, and that's where all of this lives. There's an action and advocacy section. So the program for action, as I mentioned, is those issues chosen for study, review, or modification, and membership concurrence or approval is required. And the graphics on the right are kind of graphical representations of what that process is. We have a couple different processes that I can talk about. The typical one is the study process, which a lot of people don't realize, but is a lengthy process. It does typically take 2 years to adopt a new position. There we go. Usually a study commission is put together and they study the issue, put together a study report. That study report is distributed to the local leagues and members, and then they respond to some questions that help the board develop a formal position. So at the, not this last convention that we just had, whoop, getting ahead of me, automatically moving forward.
Oh, no.
Uh, at the, not this last convention, but 2 years ago, there was actually an adoption to do a firearm study update. And that actually is still continuing. It's taking longer than 2 years because COVID hit, and that obviously impacted, you know, how often the study committee was able to meet, et cetera. But theoretically, hopefully, there will be an adoption either at the next council or at the next convention meeting. This process, whoop, one more time.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay. It's a good reminder to hurry up and keep things quick. I will also say that this process does cause a lot of confusion and is also for some members controversial because it does take quite a long time to do a new study. We also have a concurrence process, which is intended to be shorter, but also doesn't always pan out. So if you were part of the convention this year, there was a proposal to do a concurrence on, you know, dying with dignity, but that concurrence failed. So because there is a lot of confusion, and I think folks, you know, have the process, you know, people have a lot of questions about the process. There was a direction from at convention that the board put together a program task force to evaluate that process and possibly change it. So that might be changing in the future. I don't know. Okay, action alerts. We'll get to this slide since it so desperately wants to be talked about. Action alerts are essentially the email system that we use to send out emails to our members to ask them to complete an action, typically to contact their legislator. So the National League has their action alerts that they send out on national issues to contact your senators or your congresspeople. So they've sent several out, for example, on the For the People Act. The State League also has action alerts that we send out. So you may have seen, for example, this one that is in the picture, which is fighting back against voter ID. These are also targeted messaging. So often the messaging that's in here has been developed for specific reasons. So anytime I create an action alert, that the messaging is very specifically focused and tailored in a specific way. We send these often to all of our members. On occasion, we do target to members who live in certain districts. So for example, if we have a hearing upcoming in a specific committee, we might only reach out to the members who have legislators who sit on that committee. We haven't sent as many out this last year simply because the legislature has been a little weird with their COVID procedures. And they've, you know, a lot of their work has been COVID related, but we do anticipate that we'll be sending more action alerts when the time comes. If you'd like to participate in lobbying legislators and you want to do it on an issue, so action alerts are where we reach out to our members and we say, members, this is an important issue we think you might want to take action on, and we would love for you to take action on. Please call your legislator. Lobby Corps and Observer Corps is kind of the inverse. If there's an issue that is not one of the league priority issues, but you still think that the league should take action on it, and there is a league position that supports that action, you are welcome to become part of Lobby Corps and lobby legislators on behalf of the league. There's also kind of an intermediate step, which is still very helpful to this process. You can also join Observer Corps, which is where you will watch and observe legislative committee hearings and take notes. Those notes then come to me. I often use them for my personal strategizing on our lobbying activity, or if it's an issue that our members are interested in, we often will send that out, put that into a report and send that out to our members as part of our capital letter. The capital letter is our newsletter that we send out during the legislative session about what's happening at the Capitol. We focus on issues that the league is watching and lobbying on, but we also often cover other issues informational. So Lots of great information in those. So if you want to be part of, writing up about a bill that you personally are very interested in and you think other members might be interested in, I encourage you to join Lobby Corps and write something up for the capital letter. Or if you want to lobby on an issue, so we have our climate change task force. A couple of those members are Lobby Corps members, and they have in the past lobbied or presented testimony on an issue. So if that's something you or one of your members might be interested in, we would love to have you be part of Lobby Corps and Observer Corps.
The neat thing about this is that you don't necessarily have to travel to the Capitol. You can do it. It's all virtual. And so you can see everything and observe from home. And I think my learning curve hit when I was spending a lot of time observing and documenting what was going on in the legislature. It was fascinating. And I'd heard these names floating around about personalities and things like that. And I was like, oh no, nobody could do that. And then you get in there and you find out that our legislators are very interesting. They have really strong beliefs about some things, and they have some kind of camaraderie as well. So it looks confrontational, but it's not always confrontational. But I would recommend the Observer Corps for sure. Sometimes it's a little difficult to make that step and go into Lobby Corps because you are testifying, you're writing up information. This is something that I learned from Nick, is that sometimes you will be prepared to go in and testify, and they'll change, and that opportunity kind of slides away. So I think sometimes people get frustrated, but there's opportunities to do research on a specific topic that falls into our priorities and positions. So there's a wealth of opportunity here for you to do something within Lobby Corps or Observer Corps. It is at the state level, and we have some people that are working both the state level to do this work and also in their local league. So there are a handful of local leagues that are doing local Observer Corps, not Lobby Corps, but a local Observer Corps. So I just wanted to put that in. The other thing I wanted to throw in next, I wasn't fast enough to take my mute off. When you were talking about priorities, legislative priorities, one of the things that the next step for that is there are leagues that will adopt positions, and they will also have their own priorities. And they're not necessarily exactly what comes out of national or state, but it's something focused on their local league. So for example, we have an effort around water because it's so polluted. But so we look at that. We have a DEI study going on within our league. There's one that's doing work on and has a priority around social justice, racial justice. So there's a number of different things that leagues can work on. And I'm always fascinated by people that say, oh, I thought the league only worked on voting. And then they get into the Program for Action, which has both the US position and the Minnesota position. And so then they start looking and they're like, I didn't know the league was involved in this. I didn't know the league was involved in this. Well, the organization is 102 years old or so. So it has transformed. One of the things that I also hear is that the league is leaning towards one way or another. And the one thing that I've learned about this organization is that it started with a specific position and a direction and a way that it wanted to be presented to the world, and it stayed in that track. It's the political scene around us that has changed. And you have to remember, at one time, the Republicans had were more democratic. They were more like Democrats, and vice versa. And that's all changed and switched around. So the league has stayed in the middle of that, and the others have moved around. And so we have to keep that in perspective. But I hear that a lot, that we're leaning one way or another, but we're not. We're
Yep.
just true to our original mission. I'm
Yep.
sorry, I took
No,
over.
that's great, because that actually brings up another point. In this Program for Action booklet, it actually has most of the positions have the year that we adopted the position. So you can actually see that, like, you know, we've had a position on air quality or whatever for decades.
Mhm.
It's not something that just recently popped up for some reason. You know, it's been there for a very long time. Like, one thing that I noticed is that the league has actually had a position on same-sex marriage since the 80s. So the league has been principled and on its position. And then, you know, the parties and the world has kind of moved around. And, you know, that was the state league that had that position. Other state leagues, they had different positions, but that's another interesting piece of information that, you know, the league has had positions for decades. And, you know, we have been pretty, you know, we have that position. We've kind of stuck with that position for quite a while. And then it's really everyone else that has kind of changed over the years. So that's something to keep in mind and is really interesting to see when you read through that Program for Action, both the national and the state. Anita, it looks like you have a question. What do you got for us?
I was wondering with regard to advocacy at the local level and lobbying. I know that there's bylaws at the state level, and I believe at our, in Duluth, at our, you know, in our local Duluth chapter, that state that the voice of the league is the president. And I'm trying to understand how that works. If you are an organization of I'm trying to understand what that means, because, for instance, if you are presenting to the media and the president isn't available, is it typical that I'd like to hear from other chapters, is it typical then that somebody from that action group is assigned to speak on behalf of the president? Because there's just been some questions about that, I think.
Yeah.
I haven't been involved specifically. I'm just curious about your take on that, or how that's being handled in other leagues.
One thing I can explain what we do at the state level and the national level, and then if other leagues have examples, absolutely pitch in. At the state and national level, it is the person who speaks on behalf of the league is, by default, is the board chair or the president. So at the state level, that's Laura Helmer. At the national level, that's Deborah. What's Deborah's last name?
Taylor.
Oh, okay. And so they're kind of the spokesperson. But at the national and state level, we have specific policies we have adopted, and I can actually show you where those policies are if you like want to see an example. But where to speak on behalf of the league, the executive director is also authorized to do so, as well as, in certain circumstances, other staff. So that's how we handle it at the national and state level. Is the default is that the president speaks on behalf of the league. You might establish a policy where if the president's not available, you know, the executive director does it, or the executive director might establish, you know, staff. You know, local leagues, you don't have staff, but you might have a similar policy where you say, if the president's not available, then the vice president, or, you know, this person, because this person is the person knowledgeable about a specific issue. So I often speak to the media when our policy issues come up or legislative issues come up, because I'm the person who's doing that work. So I'm most likely the person to know that answer. So that's how the National and State League do it, is they kind of have a pre-established policy pointing to a specific role to take up if that person's not available. But if local leagues have something, love to hear that.
I'll tell you how we handle it at Woodbury Cottage Grove. And that is our president speaks, and then she has designated, or we have a designated public relations person who does most of our publicity, and any information that we're talking about goes through her. But really, it is our president, and then somebody has to be designated. It's not everybody free flows. It's somebody who is designated by the president to handle that job.
Yeah.
Does that help? Are there others? I can't see them.
Yeah, may I speak?
Yeah,
Yes,
go ahead,
who's
Janet.
speaking?
That's
This
Janet
is
Avery.
Janet Avery, Golden
Hi,
Valley.
Janet.
Hi, wondering about positions on COVID vaccination. I was just Googling a bit, and like the Florida League has taken a position that local school officials should decide on students wearing masks. Now I realize Florida has got a different sort of governor.
Yeah.
But other leagues have taken positions promoting vaccination, and I can't find any evidence that Minnesota has taken, put out a position on that.
Yeah.
I guess I would hope we would.
So I'm actually really glad you asked this question, because this is the type of question we get on a regular basis, which is, we don't have a position that exactly matches the issue I have in mind, but we still want to take action some way. How do we do that? Let me stop this presentation and go to our website, and I can kind of show you what I do when I get this request at the state level.
Well, and I should mention, like Pasadena as a local league has taken a position advocating for vaccination.
So let me share a different screen here. Okay, so this is the league website. If you go to under where we stand and click our positions, that will take you to the page that has that big book of all of our positions, the program for action. So, often we'll get issues proposed to us on, climate or whatever. And, when it's something like vaccines, let's use that as the example. So these positions, and as you can see, we have many positions on many issues. Let me zoom in a little bit for folks. And here we go. If you want to take action at the local level, you can do so based on a national position, a state position, or a position you've adopted at the local level. So for example, Vivian mentioned that they work on water issues in Woodbury Cottage Grove. We have water quality positions and environmental positions adopted at the national and state level. If the local league wants to adopt additional specific positions on issues, they are more than welcome to do so. But they don't have to if they want to take action. They can use the water position we already have. So it looks like environmental protection and pollution control, that's pages 13 through 16. Scroll down to that area. See, okay, environmental protection, position on water resources. So this position on water resources, so we have one from national and we have a fairly lengthy one from the state league. The local league can act on that to support whatever local action they want to do. So when we're thinking about the COVID one, what that would do is I would look for a public health position of some kind.
But we didn't have COVID in 2019.
Exactly. COVID-19 was not a thing until
I know.
until 2020.
And the vaccine has only been a thing for
position.
6
But
months. So
we do have general positions on what we call social policy, and that does include healthcare, so and equity. So we would go to that section and try to find something in these positions that would be related to public health, vaccination, etc. I don't know that we have an issue that would justify mandating a vaccine in any particular circumstance.
Prevention of
Well,
disease.
prevention of
There you
disease.
go.
Yeah, there you go.
Number
Yeah,
one on the
so-
list.
Yep.
Yeah. So,
Okay.
And there it was all along, right?
yeah,
Okay. Thank
That's
you
why
very
we need
much.
to know about these resources
I
because they're
know.
wonderful. It's a
And I mean-
wealth of information.
Yeah,
Um,
so we're all set if we wanted to do something at the local level or even at the state level.
yes.
This is
And
a
if you're
national,
so if you're acting as your
national
local
position.
league, you could do whatever in your local area. That would include your city, that would include your school board,
Okay.
things like that. And then if we wanted to take action at the state level, we also could advocate based off of that position. Usually when it gets to one of these areas where it's a little less clear, we typically go back to, it's usually up to either an advocacy chair, or when it's less clear like this, we have to consult with other board members, even the whole board or the president, to say
Mhm.
what should our specific path of action be here. So, if we wanted to advocate for
Is that the,
some,
excuse me, Nick, is that at the a state board or the local board?
it
Is there
depends.
boards?
I mean,
Okay.
it's both, or it really depends on, it depends on the situation often. The less clear, I think, and less specific the position is, so for example, the position is every US resident should have access to basic level of care that includes prevention of disease. So we would obviously, I mean, that would, to me, say we could very easily advocate that the COVID vaccine should be free, right?
Mhm.
That also, but I mean, there are other positions we could take, and that really depends on what your local board or local league. The general rule is that you should be confident that you have consensus from your league members.
Mhm.
Now, you can't always go out and poll all of your members at a given moment. So that can be hard to do sometimes, but that's the general rule. There is not a specific percentage or a hard and fast guidance on what that looks like. But so for example, another example that we've actually run into the last couple of years. We have many positions on education in general.
Mhm.
We did not have a specific position on civic education, specific to, government, how the government works, things like that. And so there kind of was a bit of a tough point where we're like, well, we think it's obvious that the league would support civics education, but we don't have a specific position on it. So we took some action at the time, but we then came back later, and a civics education position was proposed at convention and was approved by concurrence.
Mhm.
And that's how we got really clear consensus that the state league supports civic education. And actually, I think, maybe it's civics education is how we phrase it. Hold on.
And that was adopted from a different league.
Yes. Yes. So we have now a specific position on civics education that we have now used to lobby for specific legislation at the state level. So that's another way to do it, is to actually develop a position that with more specifics so that you're really clear on yes, that's something we're going to advocate for. So I would like to say that there's super easy, hard and fast rules. It's not always the case, but that's kind of the process that we've used in the past is look in our current positions. They're typically very broad.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
you can find something in there that will give you an idea of where you can go with what
Mhm.
actions you might take. And then you'll want to consult with your other leadership if it's kind of a fuzzy, So for example, the league, we have already advocated and lobbied on voter ID for years and years and years. I don't go to the board. We actually don't have a specific position on voter ID. We have a position that says we support the right to vote, and that's it. We don't have a specific position on voter ID. But because the league has, for years and years and years, already advocated on voter ID, I don't go to our board and say, should we advocate on voter ID? Because it's very clear from our established practices, and we have consensus from our members based off of what we've already done, that we can advocate on voter ID. So that's something to think about as well, is, is there,
And if I would like to put another plug in for state, if you have questions on whether you're in the right track and you're going in the right direction, don't hesitate to pick up the phone or send an email. It's almost easier to send an email because then people can get to it. And when they get to it, they might do it at 12 o'clock at night. It's easier than trying to track them down by a phone call. But ask, are we headed in the right direction? Are you in support of this? I like to keep Nick informed about some of the stuff that we're doing, where something pops up and it looks odd or something we shouldn't be doing. Then I run it by him just to make sure that we are still in the right track. I'm getting better at understanding this and finding the positions that support it, but there's nothing wrong with checking in and letting people know what direction you're going. There's another hand up. There's several hands up. I can't see them though.
Yeah, I think Anita, is the next person again.
I'm going to circle back to my question with
Mhm.
regard to local lobbying and so on. So if you leave as it is now, that and I'm assuming this is how our league does it, that the president can, okay, is this the decision of the president or the board to decide if someone can speak on their behalf? Or is it something that is it a policy that we set on a yearly basis based on whatever factors we might decide? Or is it up to the president? I'm trying to understand, how this is made.
So the default is the president decides, or the president is the spokesperson and makes those decisions. However, the board of directors can establish at any time its own policy, which might say the president must consult with the board or whatever it is, right? Like that is part of the powers of the board, is to kind of set those types of policies and to establish what the role of each officer is.
And does that go in your bylaws, or is that a separate document from bylaws?
We have a separate policy. It does not go in our bylaws. We have a policy that is
referred to.
It's referred to, yeah. And we review it, I think the board reviews it, I think every year or two. So although I don't think it has actually substantively changed in the last 4 years or so since it was established. It's been pretty much the same policy with maybe a typographical tweak or two.
Sure.
Anita, Anita, the one thing that we just need to keep in mind is that alignment within the organization. So whatever your organization is supporting, that is the message that needs to be consistent. And if we have people that are just popping up talking, they may not be saying, or they may not be saying the same thing that the group believes in. So it really is driven by what your positions are. And I think referring to a policy or developing a policy, we're developing policies all the time within our group. So work with your board on that one and come up with a solution. And your president's on the board, so work with them and come up with a solution that works for the group, for the league, because everybody is different. Every leader is different.
And I was more curious about how others were doing it. I really don't know what I do know that our president speaks for us, but I was more trying to understand because we have very strong committee level involvement. And so, they really understand the issues, and everything is out there. The whole board understands what they do. They speak on, it seems like they should have some voice on behalf of that group because they are such a strong presence. However, there's reasons, as you said, for alignment and so on.
Yep.
So,
Yep. And
Thank you.
and I think that if you are working on something and you present to the board, that it just so that they know this is the direction we're headed. It makes sense in the long term because this is a big organization and people will frequently say things, not frequently, not all the time, but will say things on behalf of the league that are not policies, they're not positions of the league. They're personal positions, not the league's positions. And that's what we have to be careful about. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
And Anita, so one thing we do have some, what works for one local league doesn't always work for another local league. Because, you know, it sounds like you have a lot of really strong committees in addition to your board. A lot of leagues, they might not, right? They have just the board and that's it. So for them, it might make sense that only the president or co-president speak on behalf of the league because they don't have anyone else to go to. But if you have, you know, specific committee people that should be, you know, consulted with at a minimum or whatever, then definitely reach out to them. You know, that would be a good practice that your board can establish if that's what your board wants.
I thought I saw Lorraine's hand up. Did you just give up on us? No, you didn't have your hand up. Okay, I'm sorry.
All right. Any
other questions? So Nick, are you going to go show us policies?
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. I can show us policies.
Let's cruise around that website because there's so much information.
Yeah. So this is the member resources page that we referred to earlier. This is right at the top. We've got some COVID-19 guidance, but there's also action and advocacy section. So this is where you can see all of our Observer Corps and Lobby Corps stuff. If you want to join Observer Corps and Lobby Corps, that's the training page, and that will explain what all those other links are. I won't go into that because that's a lot to go through, but once you join Lobby Corps or Observer Corps, those are all the links those folks use. If you were looking for that program planning, so how we adopt our positions, that was this document. So that explains the current process. And again, that might change over the next year or two. We've also got some other guidance and best practices. So for example,
can I just add something to program planning?
Yeah.
Every year, this is the big P, every year, I think it's every year, the leagues go through our program for action and they look at what's there and they will send recommendations to the state to say this position is outdated. We don't do this, or we need to tweak here, or we need to do something, or I have a proposal for a brand new thing that we should have a position on. And that happens annually. At least it does in our group, that we go through and look, and then we submit a report. And that's the big P planning, where you're doing the big stuff, and it is around the program for action. Just bringing it to local level.
Yep. Great. And then we also put some of our action kits here. So if you're interested in the People Powered for Maps program, there's a link to that action kit. I won't go over that because we've got a whole nother August Academy for that. There's also information on our links to our action alerts. So our state action alerts, there's a link to that page. This is an old action alert, but I kept it up there just for demonstration purposes. There's also a link to all the US action alerts. So like I said, their latest one is to the For the People Act, but they've also got one for the ERA, DC statehood, etc.
And if you see that they have an action alert and you know that your representative, senator, or House representative supports that, don't be afraid to send them a note and thank them for supporting it. If it's a league position, or if they are opposed to something that we're opposed to, don't hesitate to let them know that you appreciate the work that they're doing on behalf of you and the rest of the people in Minnesota.
Yeah. Yeah. The action alerts are not always just we want somebody to change their mind. It's also an opportunity to thank people who already are supporting work that we support. There's also, so I mentioned legislative interviews. So if you're new to that, a legislative interview is where local leagues can meet with their legislators, typically newly elected legislators. So after the election, once you know who your new legislators are, there might be re-elected ones, but it's the new term. Often we'll encourage local leagues to meet with them. The meeting type depends on what works for the local league. Some will meet one-on-one. It'll be 2 or 3 league members and 1 legislator meeting at a coffee shop or something like that. Or some leagues, they do town halls where they have a panel of 2 or 3 legislators or 4 legislators, and it's a whole public audience. Public audience gets to ask questions. It's really up to the local league on what works best and what the legislators are most comfortable doing, because obviously the point is to get legislative participation. And then we typically give recommended questions based off of the league's, the state league's legislative priorities. So we had some on redistricting and voting and legislative process and public participation, or legislative transparency.
And local leagues can develop their own questions.
Correct.
That are specific to what they are focusing on. Nick, can you scroll down a little bit? I know you're going to go through policies, but this is an important one. It's a reminder of what you can and cannot do. And a lot of times people think that they can't do things, or they can do things. Like meals are always real tricky. If you are having an event where there's a meal, do you or don't you offer that legislator a meal? And so Nick has created a clear policy here on how you handle those types of things. And he's probably one of the best policy writers I've ever seen, and has some good work out there. And I'm not saying that Nick does all of the work, but Nick is spread thin through the organization too. But I did want to call this out because it always becomes a question depending upon the type of meeting you have with your legislators.
Yep.
Thank
exactly.
You. I just wanted to.
No, that's great. Yeah, no, because that's actually, it's a highlight, and it's one that a lot of people don't realize. And it was a change for some local leagues.
Yep.
Because it makes sense, right, to just be friendly and buy somebody a meal if you're going to ask them to come sit with you at a coffee shop, right, to say, and we'll pay for your coffee or whatever. But unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you see it, the law has certain limits on what lobbying organizations can give to legislators and public officials. And because the league is a lobbying organization, we have some limits on that. So I essentially give a little warning that says, typically don't offer gifts, including food or drink or other compensation, to public officials for attending legislative interviews. I do mention that there is an exception, and if you think you might be part of that exception, shoot me an email, give me a call. We'll do a quick consult, and I can say, yes, that sounds good. You can totally get them a meal, or actually, unfortunately, that won't work, because the law has a very specific exception. Yeah. And so we really encourage local leagues to do this at least every 2 years, after every House election, to get to know their new or re-elected House members. Not all legislators participate. Some do. It actually is a really great opportunity to meet with legislators. We've had some, how do I put this? Not all legislators love the league equally. I'll put it that way. And, we were, just on the voter service call yesterday, we had a discussion about how some candidates aren't comfortable coming to league candidate forum. but you might have an elected legislator who might be comfortable in a one-on-one meeting. And then you get to know your legislator. You know, it's not a big public meeting, so they don't feel endangered, so to speak, or put in the spotlight or on the spot. But a small private meeting where you can ask your legislators questions and get to know each other, that can actually be very useful and helpful so that the legislator, you know, gets to know the league members and what they're thinking and where we're coming from. We actually had legislator who shared with us that he finally came to a legislative interview. And the local league shared with me that he found it actually very useful and helpful to get to know the league, and he actually felt really happy that he went to the meeting. He also was willing to share some points about why he, in the past, had not always felt comfortable coming to candidate forum. So it was also an opportunity, you know, kind of a safe space in a sense, where a legislator could share some of those thoughts for us to get better at our jobs. Not only at legislative activity, but also doing better at candidate forums.
Yeah.
So it's a great relationship building opportunity. Yeah, so this is where you'd find other guidance. Oh, yes, go ahead, Vivian.
Yeah, Nick, also, we found that our legislators really liked Zoom. And I don't know why they liked that format better. We didn't have as many people participating because we usually do a brunch, but the legislators said they preferred that to being in a meeting. And you know, you can take it either way.
Yep. And that's always useful information to know because you can use that in planning further meetings. Maybe it doesn't matter to your league and you're like, well, we do it either way. It doesn't really matter to us. Or maybe, you know, you really, really love to have in-person meetings and you want to do another one. But knowing that the legislators prefer Zoom, you can maybe ask them why they prefer Zoom and try to meet them halfway somehow. So other best practices and guidance on this page, we also have some guidance on writing letters to the editor. So if you want to write a letter to the editor in your local paper and this can be used on any issue. This is not an issue specific best practices. This one specifically was left very generic. So if you have an issue your local league is working on and you want to write a letter to your editor, this is some tips on how to get that letter to the editor published. And then some other guidance, which I think is on our policy page, which you can find a link to all of the policies under the league admin section, policies and guidance, all policies and guidance. You can also find it on our about page under governance. There's a link to the policies and governance. And these are all the policies that the state league uses and that local leagues, many of which apply to local leagues. Some of these don't apply to local leagues, right? So like a lot of these finance things, that's all for the state league. The state and board, these are policies for the state league. Membership, a lot of these do apply. Anything in this right side, I would say, might apply to local leagues and members. So
there's a reference there to speak with one voice. So that may be something else that you would want to check in on to see what the position is for the organization as you work with your board and your president. That's Duluth.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. So I think Anita asked that question. If you're looking for an example of what a policy on public relations or who can speak on behalf of the league when, this is the state's speak with one voice policy, which is based off of nationals policy. And so we have generally only the president speaks on behalf of the league unless a person is otherwise authorized by the president, the board of directors, or this policy. And we also have specific situations. So like press releases are drafted by or at the direction of the executive director and approved by the president. Lobbying, the advocacy, you know, we do that through our Lobby Corps program and all of that lobbying gets approved by the advocacy chair. And if the advocacy chair is not available for some reason, or we're running up against a very tight deadline, then the executive director or their designee may approve. So this is the kind of process that we use for kind of all those different situations. So that might be helpful if your local league is considering a more nuanced policy than the president decides. We also have other policies and best practices. So for advocacy and action, best practices for staying nonpartisan in advocacy, kind of the do's and do nots. There's more do nots, but don't get scared. It's just because we try to give really specific examples of what not to do, because that helps give people a good idea of what they should avoid doing. If you're working with other organizations at the local level, there is this guidance for local leagues on coalitions and partnerships. So if your local league wants to work with another organization on an issue in your local area, like if Woodbury or Cottage Grove was working with another organization on water issues in Woodbury, they could use this as guidance on deciding whether or not, and if so, in what ways they work with another organization. This also sometimes is helpful for voter service as well. And then there's also guidance. Sometimes we have a circumstance where an individual is running for election as a candidate, but they're invited to an event. There might be the idea to invite them to an event in their non-candidate capacity. So an example of that might be, there might be someone who is running for school board, but in their day job, they work for a nonprofit, and you and this nonprofit are working together on an issue. This kind of gives an example of how to do that appropriately and safely without there being potential confusion that the league is somehow endorsing that person as a candidate or something like that. So for example, Secretary of State Steve Simon, we work with him all the time. We have invited him to many programs before, etc. When we do that, we always kind of make sure that we're following this policy, because he is, as Secretary of State, will likely be running for I don't know for sure. I'm making that up. I assume he'll probably run again. I don't know that. Maybe he won't. But for example, several years ago when he was running for re-election, we did have a situation where this issue came up, and we had to establish this policy. And this actually, I won't go into details, but it saved us a lot of heartache because essentially some very radical protesters showed up to an event we ended up not having. So we saved ourselves a lot of headache. I think we're scheduled to be done now or soon. So I want to stop there. But if people have additional questions, absolutely, please let us know. And if you finish, it looks like there's a question from Sue. Before we get to Sue's question, if you have a question, like if you leave this and like 5 minutes later, you're like, oh shoot, I should have asked that question. Always feel free to email me or Vivian or give me a call at the office. It's what I'm here for. I'm here to answer those questions any day of the week. All right, Sue, what's your question?
Okay, we have a request to have a elected official come and speak to our group about voter suppression.
Are you from Duluth?
Yes.
I got an email from Teresa today. Yeah.
And so are we okay with that?
Yes, I emailed her back. I think she and I are going to talk hopefully next week. The general answer is yes, that should be fine. I can give you some, details and, what not to do or what to do. If this happens, guide the situation this way. But in general, for something like that, that's probably fine. And I will follow up with you both about the finer details of the answer to that question. But yes, that should be okay. Yes, Janet.
Yeah, could I put it in chat? Could both of you and Vivian put your email addresses in chat?
Yes.
That would make it easier to email you.
I just put mine in the chat, and I think Vivian,
Thank you.
Vivian's. And I also believe, yes, if you lose that for some reason, on the website, under the About section, there is a state office staff link. Let me see if I can share my screen again really quick.
And my email has an L in it. It's VL Tanniehill.
Yep.
Instead of VI.
Yes. So
Sorry.
under the About section, state office staff, that's this page, and it actually has links to email me. And I think the board page also does that for the board members as well. So if you want to get a hold of
what's her name?
Vivian, yeah, there's a link to Vivian as well. There isn't links to some of the other board members yet, because I think we're still setting those email addresses up for the new board members. But there will be links eventually for them there as well. So if you ever lose those email addresses, that's where you can find them on the website.
A wealth of information out there just for you.
Thank
You're
you.
working so hard just for all of us. So any other questions? Feel more comfortable in this arena? Is there anything else we can do for you? I don't even know what time it is. My new phone keeps going off. So it's 3:02, Nick. We're over time.
Yeah, we're a little over time. Thanks for sticking
But we
with
want to
us.
make sure that you guys have what you need. So if not, like Nick said, send us a note.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you all for
everyone for coming.
participating. Yeah, we enjoyed you.
All right. Have a good rest of the day, everyone.
Thank you.